Hello, everybody, and welcome to Madden and Benz, Unfiltered Tim Benz without Mark Madden today because, as you see, Brian Metzer from the Pens Radio Network joining us. Mark is in Vegas and will catch up with us in 2 weeks because he's going to London after this. So we'll have some guest hosts between now and then, including Metz, who you can hear during intermissions, post-game, Pens Live Weekly as well on 105.9 The X, the Pens flagship station, where you can hear Mark Monday through Friday. Myself and Tom Offerman filling in while Mark is gone, so check us out there. Metz, thanks for joining us. Appreciate you filling in. Always like having you on the podcast as well, weekly during our hockey podcast that we do every week on the Breakfast with Ben's page. But it's great to have you here on Unfiltered as well. And a great day to have you on, given the news of the day from yesterday, which was Alex Ovechkin breaking the goal-scoring record. What'd you think about how he did it? And what do you think about his legacy, say, compared to some of the other goal-scoring greats in NHL history?
Well, first, Tim, it's great to be here with you. It's always my pleasure. And you being the chief Madden fill-in typically for his radio show, it's an honor to join you as a Madden fill-in. I've done that on the air.
You've done that too. You've done that from time to time.
But you're the top dog now. So it's awesome to be here with you. And but yeah, Ovi gets it done yesterday. And he's just been on fire. He has scored a goal in every game since the end of March. He scored on March 31st. He scored in each of the 4 games in April, and he looks like he won't stop. He'll probably hit 900 before the end of the season at the rate he's going. However, he drank about 900 beers yesterday, if his social media was any indication. So he might not be up for that. But he is kind of, we talk about Sidney Crosby being a unicorn. In terms of the way he approaches the game and working out and being a prototypical hockey player. Well, Alex is a unicorn the other way. He doesn't need to work quite as hard on himself, but he can still go out there and play at a top level. And I think it was a great thing for hockey. It got a lot of attention from around the world. It got a lot of
enough.
Probably not as much as it could have, but I mean, I guess because I live kind of in that bubble, I saw almost ad nauseum talk about it, and I'm kind of glad that he did it finally, because in the NHL circles, and you know this, Tim, we've been talking about this record for 15 months, 20 months. Is he going to do it? Going back to last season and then going into this year. What makes it remarkable is that he broke his leg and he still was able to score 40 plus this season to break the record. The only thing that's really was odd to me, and I'm curious for your take, I couldn't believe that they stopped the game for essentially a half an hour to have a presentation with all of the teams on the ice, his teammates, the photos, Gretz, Gary Bettman, et cetera, et cetera. I knew that was going to happen. They talked about it, but it just seemed like they could have done a video recognition and really congratulated him and then done the ceremony post-game. I didn't realize you'd pause the game to do it. And then the Caps went on to unceremoniously lose 4-1.
Yeah, then they got dusted. And actually, they haven't been great since late March, honestly. No. I think they've only won 2 games since March the 25th. But no, it's a good point you bring up. I suppose when you think about it, Matt, it's sort of like a multi-overtime game in the playoffs in the sense that they just added one more intermission.
Yeah, except it happened in like the middle of the first period.
And so did they bring the Zamboni out to clear the ice again? I don't think they did they?
No, not that I saw. I'm not saying it didn't happen, but I don't believe that it did. It just seemed like an odd thing to do. But
it's one thing for baseball. It might even be something for football. But yeah, it felt weird for hockey. That said, I mean, the Caps are in. I didn't have a problem with it because it is the biggest story in hockey.
Yeah.
I'm sure the coaches from a hockey standpoint were thrilled about it. Maybe you could get away with doing it post-game in Washington, regardless of the outcome. I get your point. I think, one thing that Mark brought up on the podcast that I thought was an interesting conversation is, do you look at Ovechkin and say he's got the record, but he's not the greatest goal scorer ever? Like, Mark drew a thick line between being the greatest goal scorer ever and just having the most goals. In other words, he thinks that Bossy and Lemieux are still the 2 greatest goal scorers ever, even though they don't have the record like he and Gretzky for a long time before him had. If you look at an 82-game sample, for instance, I think Bossy and Lemieux both averaged 69 goals per 82 games, and Gretzky and Ovechkin are at 49.
Well, here's an interesting tidbit for you. There are 4 players in NHL history that average more goals per game than both Gretzky and Ovechkin. You named 2 of them, Mike Bossy and Mario Lemieux. Austin Matthews is ahead of them in terms of goals per game, as is Pavel Bure. Now, the thing that makes Alex Ovechkin, I think, a bit of a unique situation is that he, like Sidney Crosby, has been able to play long enough to parlay his outstanding productivity, which is essentially, 0.6 goals per game, into what he has done, which is beating this record now that has stood for 30 plus years. It stood the first time for that about that long before Wayne Gretzky broke it. It's just kind of unique. One thing that I think that we don't consider there is that Ovechkin has had the ability to have that consistency to go out and score year in and year out. He's played in some different unique circumstances that the other players maybe didn't. 3-on-3 overtime. Doing that's one thing. I think the goaltending is definitely a little bit more stout now than it was back whenever Gretzky was doing it, or even Mario and Bure. But to do that, starting power plays in the offensive zone has helped him quite a bit. I know Wayne Gretzky went out of his way to mention that to Rick Bowness on the NHL Network the other day, when Bowness tried to say that this was more difficult for Ovechkin than it was for Wayne. At least that's what he insinuated. And Wayne took a little bit of umbrage with that and said, well, I would have liked to have had those benefits. And I think that would have helped guys like Mario, Bure, Bossy, etc.
Wait, what was his point there? Like
was
Gretzky was never on a power play with the Oilers? What's he saying?
No, he was saying that you didn't always just start the power play in the offensive zone. And now you do. And he goes, like the way Wayne Gretzky said it was, I would have loved to start every power play in the offensive zone. I would have loved to play 3-on-3 overtime to pad stats. He didn't have that. However, you can make the case the other way that Wayne Gretzky, Mario Lemieux, etc., got to play against some really bad expansion teams. I mean, you don't see guys going out like Mario used to be able to do and score 6 and 7 points in a hockey game like they were. These guys today just don't have that luxury. Sid lamented that fact once behind closed doors in a conversation, saying there's no San Jose Shark in the league now that you can go out and get a 6 or 7 point night to pad a scoring race situation. But all that being said, for Ovi to do it consistently over the amount of time that he has, it's probably never going to be broken. The player that's in the league now that probably would have the best chance would be Matthews. And I don't know that he'll play long enough to do it, because you also have to stay injury free, which Ovechkin largely did in his career. I know he had the leg this year, but if you go back, out of all the players we mentioned with those goals per game, including Austin Matthews now, Ovechkin has probably had the healthiest career and been able to play the most games, which is a very huge factor in setting a record like that.
Yeah, I mean, you can always do, the whole what if injury didn't get in the way thing, and you can apply that to Gale Sayers in football, or if he didn't retire early, Barry Sanders in football. You could do that for Ken Griffey Jr. in baseball.
Yep.
You can do it for Jordan when it comes to the points record, because he took some time off to retire in between stints with the Bulls. Yep. So you could do this ad nauseum, but I don't look at Ovechkin and feel the need to parse how he got there. My eyes tell me how good of a goal scorer he was. And then when you get to the conversation about, well, what if you were to try to take him and put him into a different era? And you could say something like, well, he's got the stick now that allows him to hammer shots from the top of the circle. All the technology is in his favor in that regard. Well, then again, Lemieux and Bossy and Gretzky had goalies that were smaller and didn't have any pads on practically.
Yeah.
We can do this argument all day, but there's nothing about the goal scoring acumen that my eyes see that tell me that you have to qualify Ovechkin getting to 895 is my point.
Not at all, Tim. I agree with you. I mean, you can't take anything away from the record. I wasn't trying
It's not like he played in Coors Field and set the home run record. You know what I mean?
I mean, the air is much thinner in D.C. than it is everywhere else, and that helps.
No, the air in D.C. is pretty thick. I think we know that.
You know what? Overall, I mean, it is just such a crazy record to see fall, because for the longest time, people said it never would. Now, Ovechkin, for my money, is probably going to be the best goal scorer in NHL history that we've been able to watch. You can make cases. I know Mario was just, a beast, and I think he's right there with him. That's why all these guys are in the conversation. And guess what? At the end of their careers, these guys that are still playing, they're all going to be right there on the NHL's Rushmore. If you come down the top 10, 12, 15 scores in NHL history now, some of the names we just talked about are all right there. I mean, it is just such a crazy circumstance to think that we've been lucky enough to see Ovechkin over this course of the last 20 years do it at such a high level. people are going to make the case here in Pittsburgh, because I've already heard it, that, well, Sid or Mario is the better all-around player. Okay, fine. Centers are always going to get that. But guess what? Alex is now 11th all-time in scoring as well. So it's not as if it's just the goals anymore. And that used to be the case. You used to be able to say, well, yeah, he has all those goals, but he's not really getting the overall point total. Well, he's at 1,619 points at this point. And yes, Sid is ahead and Mario's ahead. Ovi's going to continue to play. He'll make a run at 1,700 points, which is an outstanding NHL career to go with that goal record. So, yes.
Is he going to get 1,000? Do you think he gets 1,000?
You know
get
what?
900, but will he get 1,000?
The way that he plays, and if he can stay healthy, because at 39 years old, how many more years is he going to go? Especially when you're fueling yourself with spicy Italian hoagies from Subway and Flamin' Hot Cheetos and a lot of beer. I wasn't just joking. I mean, he does that all the time. He even said it in the last 2 days. I'm not going to be shy. I like the taste of beer. Well, you and me both, Alex, but I'm not you. I'm not a professional athlete. And he just looks like there's a reason why he was Russian machine never breaks, because he's this tank of a man that can treat his body that way and still go out and do it. So I would say I doubted whenever I was asked preseason by some crew that I do some stuff with in Canada, if Alex would get the record this year. I said, no, he'll come very close and it will spill into next season. And he did it. He made it fall in enough time.
With a broken leg.
Yeah, with a broken leg. He made it fall in enough time that he has games in hand here to pad the stats and probably get to 900 before the end of this season, Tim. So for me, I'm not going to doubt that he can get to 1,000. He may have to play 2 or 3 more years to do it, but if anybody can, I think he can.
He's going to get 1,000. I want to hear from some hockey fans who are watching online. What do you think about Ovechkin's now 1,000 goal chase? And do you make a differentiation between him getting the goal scoring record and actually being the best goal scorer of all time? Is that more Lemieux? Is it more Bossy? What do you think? You can post your comments and we'll get to some of those as well. You can tweet me as well at Tim Benz PGH. Also, speaking about hockey, what a wild trip through the Central Division for the Pittsburgh Penguins. That game against St. Louis was unbelievable. Sid was fantastic against Dallas. They broke a 7-game win streak for the Stars, and then they go out and lose to the Blackhawks. So this is just a typical stretch for the Penguins. How they managed to blow a 2-goal lead against St. Louis. They bounce back and play well and beat Dallas and end their win streak. Sid looks fantastic along the way, and then they lose to the Blackhawks of all teams. So go figure, except you don't have to go figure. It is the Penguins, and this is just who they are.
Well, it was reminiscent of the 5-2 loss to the Blackhawks at the end of 2 seasons ago that essentially eliminated the Penguins from the playoffs that year. And then, they have the showing that they did against those very quality opponents that you mentioned. I thought they played outstanding hockey over the 3-game set. Big win against the Dallas Stars, came close to beating the St. Louis Blues that are near unbeatable right now. They haven't, you and I talked about it last week, and I know you've talked a little bit more with other folks about it. They have been on fire since the Penguins beat them in the game that they played prior to that. So the Blues on top of the world, and then even Ottawa, the game that they played, the young guys made their re-debut and debut with the Penguins and really helped invigorate the lineup. So for me, I couldn't believe that they went into the game against the Blackhawks and looked so bad. However, I guess that was just that the talent drop-off was such that the Penguins had such an emotional win against Dallas, made that a reality, and then you go up against a team that you probably let your guard down on and thought, oh, we should be able to handle them. Well, the Blackhawks came to play, and they got an outstanding performance from Spencer Knight. Yeah. So that was probably the difference, and people kind of forget that way back earlier in the season in a game here in Pittsburgh, trying to see which date that was. The Penguins played the Florida Panthers when Spencer Knight was still a member of that team, and they lit him up. They scored a bunch of goals on him in like 16 shots.
They chased him, right?
Yeah, well, he stayed in, if I'm not mistaken, and he just got shelled. It was like 5 goals on 16 or something. And then he played them again in Florida and was much better, but not quite like he was in this newfound life that he has in Chicago now, where he looks like he could be a bona fide number 1 starting goaltender for them, which is something that they really needed on the back end of this rebuild that we joked yesterday on our Penguins postgame show, Tim, feels like construction on Route 28. It just never ends. And when it does, there's a sign up the next day saying road work will begin the next day. And the difference is they have Connor Bedard standing there in a hard hat, kind of waiting for the construction to end. And it may not end before he gets frustrated enough to ask out, but that's just my opinion. But Spencer Knight's a big step in the right direction. all that being said, Penguins look pretty good, defensive prowess aside, in the 3 games against the better opponents, but that went right out the window yesterday, and Erik Karlsson was back to his old tricks. Team did not look good defensively, yet you have guys like Brian Rust and Ricard Raquel either setting career highs or tying career highs in goals. You got Sid doing what he's doing, and if they could have played any defense this season effectively and maybe gotten a big save here or there, they're likely a playoff team, even though they wouldn't have gone far because they're not constructed in a very solid way to win a Stanley Cup right now.
Well, back to Crosby and how well he played against Dallas. One thing we're usually pretty good at in the sports media is patting ourselves in the back when we get something right. I know I'm great at it. Mark, I'm not as good as Mark, but, and I'm sure you in your time, Mets, would love to point out when you get things right and pretend you never get anything wrong. I'm also very good at that.
We're right all the time, Tim.
But, one thing that I think was talked about a lot when Crosby first got into the NHL, and honestly, I think deserves a little bit more conversation now because with the lens of time that we have now, it's been proven right that a lot of us said back when he first got into the league, you know what, this kid's game is going to age well. Because, once we got a good look at him over the first 2 or 3 years of his career, you could see how even when he got into his 30s and his skills diminished some, he was still going to be able to bring a lot of what he brought on a nightly basis into his late 30 years. Whereas, if the speed diminished or the hands diminished, the hand-eye coordination diminishes a little bit. The shot, it's not like you ever had a booming shot to begin with. We've seen the deterioration of Evgeny Malkin's shot from the circle and the power play the last couple of years, just as a comp. You don't see that with Sid because that backhand is always going to be there. His ability to tip goals in front of the net and like his hockey acumen, where to take a shot from, how to get to a spot, how to delay and fool the goaltender into opening up the 5-hole. Like all that stuff with Sid has translated over the years exactly as how we thought. And that has allowed him to still be the scorer that he is, even though he's not the proficient goal producer like some of the other guys we've mentioned today in comparison to Ovechkin.
Yeah, he's not going to ever have that, ripping slap shot or anything. However, you can make a case that some of his slap shots that we've seen in the last couple of years might be better than he used to be able to take when he was younger. He's evolved into that guy with the drop to a knee and shoot the puck and get that extra torque on it. But to your original point, Tim, yes, he was always playing a game that would age well because he was just a hardworking blue-collar guy with high-end skill, which typically the hardworking blue-collar guy really doesn't have the skill to go with that blue-collar approach. Sid has been a hybrid in that way. And as his years have gone by, he's just kind of worked on finding areas to maybe not get himself killed as easily. When he was younger, he'd go into traffic a lot more. He would go right towards the net. He would crash the net. He would do all of that. And he still does it to a certain extent, but he evolved into a man that could stand off to the right or left and do that tip that he has perfected. He's done that so well. And it's been really unique to watch. And we were talking about this the other day on the network as well. The game looks easier for Sidney Crosby now than it ever has. And you wouldn't have expected that to happen as he came to the end of his 30s. I mean, this guy is pushing 40 years old, playing better than guys half his age, or at least in their 20s. And he looks as good as he has at any point over the last decade. And I think it's largely due to the way that he plays the game. His face-off work is always outstanding. It's an anomaly if he has a losing night in the circle. It's an anomaly if he doesn't get a point, as we know, with this point per game stuff for 20 straight years. I'm not certain that around the league that gets enough attention. And when I say that, I mean fan bases, etc. The NHL knows what it means to have a guy go out and bring that sort of consistency. There was a person in the Penguins Reddit the other day, which he was starting a fight that, boy, they really want to manufacture these stats now just to give people credit. That's not that impressive. Points in, a point per game over 20 straight years. What's the big deal with that? They just want to manufacture a stat to try and have that go up against some other, for a conversation. I don't think people realize how tough that is to do. If it was that easy, everyone will be a point per game.
Oh, it is. I just don't like using that as a way to diminish from Ovechkin's goal chase.
And I'm not even talking about him. Yeah.
No, I know, but I know there was the Reddit sections and whatnot.
I got you. Yeah.
There was, annals of Penguins history, you
can
can
make the
go back a
comparison.
long
Yeah.
way, and you don't have to work very hard to find people trying to prop up Sid to tear down Ovechkin in any way, shape, or form. It just happens, and Capitals fans
Yep.
do it the same way in the other direction. I just don't. We can talk about how impressive a point per game over 20 is versus the goal scoring record, but I don't want to use that simultaneously as a way to say, hey, Sid is better on a day when
No.
Ovechkin
Yeah.
set one of the most hallowed records in the history of the sport.
I'm completely there with you. If anything, I would use it to say this is just another reason why Sidney Crosby and Alex Ovechkin have been the flag bearers since 2005 and have essentially carried your league for you. And you've tried to turn the page on both of them as a league multiple times, saying it's going to be McDavid's league, it's going to be Matthews' league, it's going to be Bedard's league, it's going to be XYZ's league. We've watched them do that so many times. And guess what? At the end of the day, it always ends up being those two guys, as long as they've been here, carrying the flag and helping. Because coming out of that lockout, it was Sid and Ovechkin coming out of the gates in the same season. The league almost lucked out, Tim, based on the way things went with their drafts, because Ovechkin would have been in the league a year earlier if not for the lockout. But because of the lockout, they got to start together and become almost immediate rivals. The Penguins obviously had the better of that rivalry at the beginning of it. The Caps got the better of it at the end of it. But those two guys were always the ship kind of guiding the league and being the storyline and being the big stars. And they still are to this day. And I think those two things, those two feathers in their caps, as they both shoot up the record books in terms of all-time history, make them even more solidified as guys that essentially pulled the league out of the doldrums of that crap back in 04-05.
Well, yeah, and I don't begrudge the league trying to promote the next ones like they've tried to do with McKinnon and McDavid. They're just not the right guys.
Yeah.
McKinnon doesn't have a personality really all that much, and McDavid refuses to play along. Like there's, I just don't think that there's McKinnon is what he is, and McDavid just kind of rebuffs it almost actively. So they're not going to be able to carry the torch personality-wise from those two. But the NBA did that. The NBA had Bird and Magic who saved the league, kind of like Sid and Ovi did, but they were ready to promote Michael, and they sure as heck did.
Yeah.
The difference is Michael was willing to carry it, and those other guys you mentioned just aren't able to do so for whatever reason. Matthews might be in the same boat for that matter, but that's sort of a bigger dynamic problem that we probably can't figure out in the next 9 minutes of this podcast. And sort of to that point, speaking about problems that we can't figure out in 9 minutes, how about 46 years? And there's the Pirates. It's going to be interesting, Mets. So Tuesday night, the Pens are home against the Blackhawks, right?
Yes, they'll finish off the second part of that home series.
So we got this whole thing that we're just talking about with Sid, who's still playing great, not much else around. And then you got Paul Skeens, just a 2-minute drive down the road at PNC Park. And by the way, if you've been hearing it in the background, they're testing the fireworks at PNC Park right now. I can actually look out and see the smoke outside of my window as they're testing the fireworks at PNC Park, because obviously they didn't shoot off enough. The Yankees were doing that almost all by themselves the first few games of this series. I guess some of the fireworks go bad, so they just got to get rid of them in the middle of the morning. But it's going to be interesting to see who gets more fannies in the seats. Sid versus Bedard, with neither team being any good, and then Skeens and the Pirates against the Cardinals on Tuesday night.
The fireworks will get the butts in the seats. That's for sure.
When is the first fireworks game? It's
honestly,
pretty soon, right?
Yeah, it's got to be coming up because it is the Pirates MVP at times. I think they have at least one per month during the season because it draws in fans. Sometimes there's a concert in conjunction with it, and who doesn't love music and fireworks? And even if there isn't going to be a live band, there's a great music show. But to your question, I imagine, based on what we've seen with the folks in Pittsburgh, they've had a chance to see Bedard already. Everyone's, I think, going to descend down to PNC Park for a Paul Skeens night, hoping that they can see him continue what's already been a nice start to his season and potentially see a Pirates victory going for another one. What is it going to be? Like number 3 or 4 on the season? They have just not started so well here. It's been ugly, blowing games. The bullpen stinks, and they've almost blown every Skeens outing as well. And I mean, that's kind of happening here. He goes out and does his job, and it's a shame because all of that kind of stuff is what could come into your brain when you get down to the point of getting through his arbitration years and signing him, etc. Is he going to want to stay if he doesn't see tangible results of things going on track here in a positive direction with the Pittsburgh Pirates?
Richard says Ovechkin is the greatest goal scorer of all time due to consistency and health, which is a great credit to him. He will finish the top 10 all-time greatest players. Crosby is arguably already a top 5 player and will likely find close to 2,000 points depending on how long he decide to play. He also has typical Penguins this weekend, represents what they have been recently. Beat the best, and look great doing it, then laying egg against the worst of the worst and looking exactly what they are, which is a team in retool mode. Hey, one thing to bring up, I wanted to talk about the Rangers draft choice that they have given to the Penguins. They could hold on to that, or they can give it to them this year. It's either this year or next. They don't have to tell the Penguins what they're doing until 48 hours out. And it's funny, Matt, it's incumbent on where the Rangers finish this year. It's protected the first 13 on in.
Yep.
And there's 12 good draft picks in this draft. So, it's right on the cusp. It's right on the cusp there.
Yeah, and that's going to be all eyes are going to be on that. Right now you have the Rangers in a spot where they're not free falling, but they're 4-5-1 in their last 10. Penguins are obviously going to get themselves or working towards getting themselves a top 5 pick. You have Seattle going to play tonight. They're just 2 points behind them. The Flyers play tonight, if I'm not mistaken. They're 3 points behind them. So they could both potentially jump the Penguins at some point. They both have games in hand. And if they do, that would drop the Penguins into a spot where they are in the bottom 5. So their pick, where it finishes, probably determines a lot of what they do with the draft. Because I did see, I think we had a commenter ask us, Tim, if we thought Dubas would move up with the Rangers pick and all of that. I think it all depends on where the Rangers pick is and what their pick is. Because if they get themselves a top 5, you would probably need the Rangers pick and your own pick to move up a little further if you wanted to. It might not shock me, depending on if the Rangers fall on the outside of that 12 and the Penguins get the pick. What they could feasibly do is trade that to somebody to get themselves maybe a couple more picks in the second round, or to jump into a second round spot next year. But I fully anticipate the Penguins are probably, if they get the Rangers pick, likely to use them both themselves just to continue to add, things to the chamber here. Another top prospect in the top 5 to 7 picks, maybe one with the Rangers in the top 15 guys of this draft, because even though on paper they say it's not great, it feasibly still has been proven that you can find a diamond in the rough there. There might be a guy that a lot of other people are down on, and the Penguins could end up taking a swing and getting, with that pick. Plus, there are times where a player, we've seen it with Shane Wright a couple years ago, the kid that was supposed to be the top overall pick, fell all the way down, essentially the Seattle Kraken when they drafted him. And he was almost petulant about the fact that he wasn't the number 1 overall. And I think that affected him for a year or two. Now he's starting to round into form for the Kraken. Penguins could have a guy like that just drops inexplicably, and then you snag him with one of those later picks. So they might hold on to him.
Eric says, why would Nutting go before the media and say what he said about doing all that he can do to field a winning team and providing the resources to do so with a straight face nonetheless? That's a breathtaking lie, even for him, and he's likely the most abhorrent, evil owner in the history of sports. I'm torn between whether or not he knows it's a lie. Sometimes I wonder how much he just believes his own BS.
I think he does to a certain extent. And for me, would you agree with this, Tim? In his mind, he feels he has done all he can do. And when he says that, he means I was only going to allocate $10 to purchasing this item this year. I spent all 10 of those dollars. I didn't save one. So he's not
right. Well, actually, that's a good point. That's a very good point. And I hadn't thought of it until you framed it that way. It might actually behoove the Pirates if Nutting does believe his own BS. Because if he believes his own BS, then he'll put the onus on Cherington and Shelton. And what we've seen is that Cherington and Shelton can't win under these constraints.
Yes.
Maybe somebody else can. Maybe they'll find the next Hurdle and Huntington to get a small window where they can compete, because it ain't going to be these guys. We already know that. This comes from George, who says, if the Steelers sign Rodgers, I'll still watch them, but I'm not going to give them any money this year. No tickets, no merch, just the knockoff stuff in the strip. There's plenty of that going around Acrisure Stadium as it is. It doesn't seem to hurt the Steelers in the pocketbook. I don't think the Steelers are really going to be hurt in the pocketbook by what happens with Aaron Rodgers. Unless it's, well, I mean, literally, like Rooney could. It could be just throwing money for the sake of throwing money, because I don't think it's going to make a difference in terms of wins and losses all that much. They might go from 7-9 to, sorry, not 7-9 anymore. I got to get used to saying that. 7-10 versus 9-8. But I don't think they're going to win a playoff game just because Rodgers is here.
I don't think it's going to happen either. I'm convinced at this point that he's going to come. So, prepare for the protesting or whatever's going to happen, because people are going to be, angry about it. But I've already heard, Tim, there's a lot of the fan base that has come across in social media, radio shows, etc., that started, media are doing this too. It started as absolutely not. Nobody wants Rodgers. All of the commentary lately is people trying to talk themselves into how great it's going to be.
That's what the Steelers want. That's what the Steelers, that they're not upset that it's taking this long, as is normalizing it.
Yeah, and would you agree with this? On the other end of it, it's almost as if there's going to be a layer of disappointment if he doesn't sign here now.
Yeah, well, that's true too. Now they put themselves in a corner where they have to trust Rodgers to actually come through, because if they don't, the analogy I keep using is they're trying to avoid walking away with egg on their face, but we all know they ordered the omelet.
Yeah.
So, it's coming. And before we go here, I got one more match. This comes from Timothy. He says the Misfits sticker really makes the decor. It's sort of like the rug in the Big Lebowski. It ties the room together.
Yeah.
What I'm wondering is, when's the last time you actually played a cassette out of that recorder that's behind you there?
It's been a little while. I played a couple of CDs in it recently.
Oh, is there a CD lifter on top?
I'm going to turn quickly just to do
All
this.
right.
I have a little stack here, and it's old school stuff. I have an Emperor CD, black metal from Norway. I have that. I have an old Rob Zombie.
Okay.
I got a Mayhem, more black metal from Norway. Cradle of Filth album. And I have Danzig 3 with me. And I have, lastly, this is Arcanium, which is also trollish black metal from the 90s, which it's kind of crazy stuff. But these were in my old office. I've been at this non-media job that I work in addition to all my other duties for close to 25 years. So I had an office in this building that the radios followed me through. These CDs are ones that I've just had here for quite a long time, and I do peruse them from time to time, but no cassettes.
I still used my CD player in my Jeep that I had. I had a Jeep for like 10 to 12 years, something like that.
I rode in your Jeep. Yeah, I rode.
Yeah, I still use that CD player all the time. And then I bought a new car last December. And I just, in a hurried rush to exchange the cars, because I forgot to do this, I took all the CDs out of the side compartment and put them in the new car. And they're still there a year later. And I don't even have a CD player in this new car.
You know what was awesome?
I can't bring myself to take the CDs and say I'm never going to use these again.
Your old Jeep was awesome, because Tim and I were traveling somewhere once, and I said, "Hey Tim, I got to charge my phone. Do you have a charger?" He goes, "Oh yeah, it's right there, Matt." So I had a USB. He had a plug. It was an actual plug in the Jeep. I like, oh well, crap! I don't have the plug head. What am I going to do?
The classics never die, Matt.
It was tremendous. But yes, I miss my CDs. I still have a huge CD collection. However, 99% of my listening happens on Spotify or occasionally my old iTunes still.
I still miss the at the old place where we were doing Penguins broadcast, and I was on the X. Abby, who was the music director, had that wall of CDs in her office, like that had been passed down from generation to generation of whoever the music director was, the X. And
she had an Abbott Snow Globe as well, the front man at the time of Norwegian black metalers Immortal. And then I had to buy myself one. I had to track it down because it was so cool. And I asked her, "Where did you get that?" I thought it was like a one-off. She goes, "Oh no, Abbott sells them." So I have it as well now. But yeah, she had a bunch of cool stuff in that office.
Well, thanks for doing this, Matt. Appreciate it. We'll talk in the podcast tomorrow, all right?
Sounds good, brother. Thank you for having me. And hey, thanks everybody for tuning in for this Madden fill-in by Brian Metzer.
We will be back next week with a guest host to be named later, much like a Pirates trade or a Penguins trade these days.
Hopefully it's not just Cash, because you'll just be talking to
Cash, that's right.
You know what? You're the key fill-in, Tim, so you'll just interview yourself.
That's right.
I'm filling in for Madden today, and
and I will be in for Mark actually Thursday and Friday, so we'll talk to you then on 105.9 The X.